Hello, class! Today we're going to discuss a certain paradox in aesthetics. That's the area of philosophy that deals with sensation, the Greek aesthesis, sensation. Because it deals with sensation, aesthetics often also deals with puzzles about the philosophy of art, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Here's some study guide questions to help us get started. 1. What is the paradox of horror? 2. What is the romantic solution to the paradox of horror? 3. What is the psychological solution to the paradox of horror? 4. What is the content-analytic solution to the paradox of horror? Alright, as always, when I cover the answers to these questions, you may want to pause the video so that you can type up the answers, write them down, crochet them into a sweater, or carve them into an ice sculpture. So, today we're going to be discussing an aesthetic puzzle about a certain genre of fiction, specifically horror fiction. If you like scary movies, scary stories, scary works of art, or scary music even, then this may be of particular interest to you. Like many genres of art, including comedy and thriller, horror is named after the emotion that it aims to inspire in its audience. The Latin horrere, which means to bristle, refers to one's hair standing up on end. And there's kind of a puzzle about why that genre even exists. After all, nobody really likes being scared. It's a negative emotion and we try to avoid being scared when we can. And yet, that is also the thing which seems to attract people to the genre. It's an old puzzle about how we can like negative emotions. Formally speaking, we can set up the paradox this way, as an inconsistent triad. That is, the paradox of horror is a set of 3 assumptions, each of which is plausible on its own, but which when taken together entail a contradiction. Since contradictions are unacceptable, we have to decide which of these assumptions is really the false one, and we need to explain why it's false and why our rejection of it doesn't violate common sense. The 3 assumptions in the paradox of horror are as follows. First, audiences enjoy horror fiction for its distinctive genre-defining characteristic. Secondly, the distinctive genre-defining characteristic of horror fiction is that it frightens and disgusts. And finally, audiences do not like being frightened and disgusted. There. Together, these 3 assumptions entail a contradiction. We say that audiences don't like being frightened and disgusted, but they do like the distinctive genre-defining feature of horror fiction, and that feature is, frightening and disgusting. That's the contradiction. So we need to decide which of these assumptions is actually the false one. Perhaps the first assumption is false. That is, perhaps audiences don't really like horror fiction for its distinctive genre-defining characteristic. Maybe they like it for some other reason, some kind of unconscious drive or some sort of ulterior motive. To deny this first assumption is what we might call the psychological solution to the paradox of horror. We're going to talk about Freudian solutions to the paradox of horror as examples of the psychological solution. Or maybe that second assumption is false. Maybe what defines horror fiction isn't just the mere sensation of fright and disgust. Maybe there's something deeper to what horror fiction really is. To take that solution is to adopt what we'll call the romantic solution to the puzzle of horror fiction. As an example of the romantic solution, we're going to discuss the views of H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote a brief but complex essay on what the nature of horror fiction is. It's quite influential. Or perhaps audiences do, in some very specific sense, like being frightened and disgusted. Perhaps in some yet-to-be-specified sense, the way in which we relate to frightful and disgusting content is not mere aversion. Maybe, in other words, we need to discuss a little bit about the content of fright and disgust in a way that's deeper than just aversion or enjoyment. To adopt that solution is to adopt what we'll call the content-analytic approach to the paradox of horror. And for an example of the content-analytic approach to the paradox of horror, we'll be looking at Noel Carroll, who, by the way, explains all of these views as well as the paradox in his book, The Philosophy of Horror, or Paradoxes of the Heart. In fact, this is the main text that we'll be using for the next few lectures that follow on what horror fiction is and how to get out of this puzzle. So that's our first little introduction to this puzzle. As we continue this unit on aesthetics, not only will we look at the different solutions to this puzzle and problems with those solutions, but we'll also look at other aesthetic puzzles too. That's it, just a brief video for now. Thanks for watching.